97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher, powered by InsideTheBirds.com.
We expect to win every time we step on the field. That's just the mindset that we have.
Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
All right, time for Football at 4. It's powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and brought to you by PlaySugarHouse.com. Sign up now. They'll match your first deposit at $250. Go right now to PlaySugarHouse.com and win real money with their sports book along with casino games from the comfort of your home. Must be 21 or older to play. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Mike Gill, Hunter Brody. Geoff Mosher is in for today's Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. And Doug Pederson was back at practice today. And what exactly, Geoff, does that mean? What is practice as the NFL has kind of, updated its ramp-up period? So what is getting Doug Pederson back actually mean for the Eagles?
Well, it's been a good time for them and for Doug. Up until today, having Doug Pederson away from the team didn't really impact the team. He could still do virtual sessions, still do Zoom sessions, and there was only a little bit of on-field work that could be done in the form of conditioning and things like that. But as of today, ironically, Doug comes back, and today is the beginning of the gradual ramp-up period that will go from today until the 16th, which I believe is Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. And so you'll start to see the team get on the field. They can be on the field for about 3.5 hours. There is an off day. The 15th is an off day. They can have non-padded practices starting on, I want to say Friday, the 14th. So hopefully my dates are, no, that would be Thursday. I'm sorry, Thursday and Saturday, they can have non-padded practice days. Friday's the day off. And then the 12th and 13th, today and tomorrow, they can be out there with helmets and protective shirts and things like that for about 90 minutes. So I guess what the point is, today is kind of like what an OTA would look like, and Doug Pederson's back, and he's able to be out there with the coaching staff and the players. So there's a sense of normalcy returning here.
What is, they're getting close to the padded practices. I know Doug had mentioned, there's no preseason games. So what is kind of the thought process to kind of make up for the fact that you're not going to see another team? Are they going to have scrimmages? Is that something that's a possibility?
Yeah, Doug was asked a lot about that today, and he had some really interesting answers. As far as scrimmages in which there is tackling to the ground and full contact and blocking and things, he has typically done about 2 of those per camp. And he's not deviating from that, which is a little bit of a surprise. But he made the point that even his normal training camp practices are very intense and very grueling as it is. And so he doesn't feel the need to go ahead of the 2 that he normally does. So he's going to still do that. But he did make an interesting point about the lack of preseason games. If you think about every preseason game, and normally there are 4, you have a day off before, you have your preseason game, and then you have a day off after. So 4 times in training camp, you have a 3-day stretch where your players are only doing very little as far as, playing or learning, right? 2 off days and then however much time they wind up playing in a preseason game, which is usually not a lot for most of the team. But now that they don't have those preseason games and they don't have to have the before and after off days, they can get a better evaluation. At least this is how Doug put it. He has more time, at least, to get the guys on the practice field over there at the NovaCare and the Link and get a fuller evaluation than he would if there were preseason games.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff, you're a little bit more than a month before the season starts. Where is, position battles? What does he need to kind of find out as you get into practice? It seems like there was no OTA. So, how do they catch up and, where are they?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Mike, because Doug said today, and I was a little surprised by this, and I think that, look, you've heard Doug's press conferences, I have, Hunter has. We all know the deal that Doug is an overwhelmingly positive kind of guy, and he's always looking at the bright side. And he said today that he didn't feel like his team was playing catch-up. He said the offense has been installed, the defense has been installed, and the team has been able to learn the playbook virtually and also through their classroom sessions that they've had in the last 2 weeks, and then even in the little bit of grass time that they have had. He said that stuff is in. He even went as far to say that they are now onto situational football, third down, fourth down, red zone, things that you would normally progress toward in the middle of camp. So he's not treating this, at least the way he's speaking publicly, right? He's not treating this like everything starts today because today is the first time that they're really on the field and able to do something. He believes that the protocols that were in place and the system that they had in place enabled enough learning to go on. Now, that's coming from his mouth. I definitely think, though, that these next 2 weeks are vital for a lot of guys, maybe even doing well in learning, to show that they can translate that from the classroom to the football field. And it's going to be important for anybody who is struggling to kind of bridge that gap quickly before they get lost in the bus. And, of course, we talk about that. We talk about rookies mostly because we know that they're going to naturally be a little bit behind veterans.
Yeah, no question. And, you look at the rookie class, this is the first time in a while that they've had more than like 5 guys. So they actually have a bunch of guys that they got to, get in there. And they have some key guys, Jeff, at, Javon Hargrave, Darius Slay, guys who are going to play some significant roles that need to get out there and learn the guys around them if they want to have as big of an impact as you signed them to have or traded for them to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And Doug also talked about that. One thing that'll also be interesting about this year's camp as opposed to us is that in the past, Doug has liked to mix and match on his first team and his second team and get certain guys in. And all right, so let's take right guard, okay? Jason Peters has to learn right guard for the first time. Typically in a camp, let's say it was just Brandon Brooks, he might get Matt Pryor in there on first team a couple of days, give Brandon Brooks a maintenance day. You might see Nate Herbig or some other offensive linemen get those opportunities. But now, do you mix and match, or do you give Jason Peters every single rep that he needs at right guard? Now, Doug said today that he would continue to do what he does, which is try to get guys in game atmosphere situations, and that includes rookies, and that includes newcomers. So he'll have to do that. But certainly, in the past where he has scaled back on a Jason Peters or a veteran or maybe given a couple of young kids more reps than normal, I don't know that he's going to be able to do that as much this time around.
Right, and then obviously with no preseason, he's going to have to use these training camps for more evaluation, and you try to figure out how do you balance evaluating players in a training camp setting in terms of playing time.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. And, to hear Doug talk about it, he called it a fine line. He said that's
he called it a what? You broke up a little bit there. What did he call it?
Sorry, he said a fine line.
Okay, gotcha.
So as coaches, they need to be able to do what they normally do, but obviously they're in a different kind of evaluation period. And he did admit that this is going to be new for them, and he said this is why he really took a look at the schedule and the way things are situated in the next couple of weeks. And, he knows that everybody's basically in the same boat around the league, so that helps. But, I don't see him changing a whole lot, his evaluation process or what he normally does. But he and the staff know that they're probably going to have to put a little more weight on what they see in a practice session as opposed to even a scrimmage or a preseason game. And B, they're probably going to have to lean on their veterans a little bit more, as you would think.
Right. Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast, Football at 4 here on 97.3 ESPN. And then, I mean, another interesting thing is, like during a preseason game, for instance, Jeff, you might have your third defense, like Deshaun Hall, getting sacks, but he's up against the third tackle, so you don't put as much stock into that. Does he think that these will, be more intense practices because the third defensive end is going up against the first team? Like, is he going to do that? Like, you know what? Let's see what Josh Sweat can do against Lane Johnson.
Yeah, I think he's going to have to do that in those scrimmage days, those 2 scrimmages where they really go live tackle into the ground. I think he's going to have to come up with his best rotations and personnel substitutions, and he's going to have to make it as close to game-like situation as possible. But he has also said, and so has Jason Kelsey and some other players in the Zooms, they say that they feel that Doug's camp, even though it's not as, say, physical as Andy Reid's to be because you just don't tackle as much, they feel that the structure of the camp is as grueling. It's hot out, it's day after day. They've always felt that Doug runs an intense camp, maybe not as physical as what we were used to 10 years ago, but in absence of that, Doug has always ramped it up first team versus, he's done first team versus first team before, first versus second, second versus first. And I think that he will have to continue to do that, and they'll be ready for it.
Yeah, and, those are always the interesting things. You see a guy who's performing really well, but you can't really get a gauge because he's performing against guys who are not making other teams. Now you have an opportunity to see, hey, this guy's performed well. Let's move him up the depth chart and see how he performs against other guys. A guy in that mold would be a Greg Ward, who got a lot of playing time last year. He performed well in the preseason games, but not well enough to make the team. But do you see does Doug see his role changing at all this year? Because I think he's one of those guys that, in training camp before, the preseason games obviously didn't help him out because he performed well in those games.
Yeah, Doug didn't say it. In fact, he mentioned Greg Ward as a player that he really likes and has performed well and understands the offense really well, the concepts, the routes, especially because he used to be a quarterback. And he also said he could be a leader to the wide receiver position group, which makes a little bit of sense because if you consider the fact that Alshon Jeffery could be sidelined for a little bit and that Deshaun Jackson is coming back from an injury and he's not been here for 10 years or anything. And Greg Ward, to be honest, has been here longer. Greg's probably one of your more, if you count the times that he was with the team on the practice squad or in camp, he's been here longer than a lot of the wide receivers. Certainly, you got 3 rookies that you have to acclimate. So he can help with these rookies, especially guys like Hightower and Watkins that are probably in the same position where they're going to have to really scratch and claw to make the team, and they may have to start out on practice squad. So that's what Doug said. He had nothing but good things to say about Greg Ward. Now, my interpretation would be I think Greg Ward could certainly be up for a change in role, and no fault of his own. But if Jalen Reagor is playing well, and if Deshaun Jackson is doing his thing, if J.J. Arcega Whiteside is improving, they've got to figure out ways to get these guys on the field. And certainly Adam Kaplan has said that he suspects that Alshon Jeffery is not going to be out for a real long time, and see what happens from him. So if Alshon does rejoin the team, that does create another, wide receiver spot that's occupied. I do think that they're going to want to take a look at Jalen Reagor in the slot a little bit, especially if you have Deshaun on one side and Alshon or JJ on the other. And that obviously would mean less and fewer snaps for Greg Ward. So we've got a lot to figure out here. Guys have to perform well. They have to be healthy and all that. Yeah. I think, you play a game today, Greg Ward is your starting slot receiver when you're in 3 wide 11 personnel. But we're not playing a game today. We got a month, and we'll see what goes on there.
Well, I was going to say, is there, when you're at training camp here, what spots at wideout are up for grabs? The number 3 wide receiver, the number 2 wide receiver, other than Deshaun Jackson, is anything set in stone? I would imagine that's a no.
That's a good question, and we'll have a little bit. I'm going to tease a little bit, Mike. That I have a little bit of intel that we're going to drop tomorrow morning, the Inside the Birds pod, about the wide receivers. But to answer your question, if you think about Marquise Goodwin retiring, right, he was probably going, if he was going to make the team, which I think he probably would have, it would have probably been as a backup Z. He would have been Deshaun Jackson's backup because he's got speed like Deshaun does, and he's more suited for that position. So now you need a player who play that position. Jalen Reagor was mentioned as learning that spot, but I also know that they've been practicing Jalen Reagor at the X already in camp so far. Then they envision Reagor moving all around. So I think there's opportunity for a Watkins or a Hightower to look at that backup Z spot, which means you're on special teams to begin with. But if Deshaun Jackson gets hurt, you need to be able to step in there and provide that vertical threat that Deshaun would normally provide if he were to get hurt.
And real quick, what is the status of Alshon Jeffery? Is he more in their plans than maybe we thought? Is he going to be back quicker than maybe we thought? Is he more in their plans even when he gets back? Because I find that to be another interesting conundrum. What if the receivers are playing well in the roles that they're in, and then all of a sudden you got Alshon Jeffery coming back?
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how it all unfolds. And I think if you shot the Eagles up, their coaches, at least with true serum, they would say they're not 100% sure of what they're going to do. And they would love everybody to be healthy and productive all at the same time, so that it's a difficult decision as to what they're going to do with their personnel. But we all know that, after a few weeks of camp and into the season, not everybody is healthy and at peak production. So invariably, there'll probably be some spot open that allows the situation to take care of itself. But Alshon first has to be able to get on the field and practice and come off the list and be healthy and be able to play.
Well, the guy you would think he would be getting his reps is what? JJ Arcega Whiteside. And what if JJ's actually playing well? You don't want to just yank him, right?
Well, and that's why I say it's maybe the Eagles probably wouldn't talk about it right now, but they want to see a lot of things first. I mean, we have to actually see if JJ Arcega Whiteside is playing well. And don't forget Rager. Rager is a guy that has capabilities of playing the X position as well, especially if Deshaun is entrenched at the Z. So what happens if you have a healthy Alshon, a healthy Rager, a healthy JJ Arcega Whiteside, and all three of them are playing fairly well? Well, then you're either moving guys around to create special packages, or you're trying to figure out what you do with your roster in that regard.
That wide receiver spot. What about corner, nickel? Is Roby Coleman the guy who is the number one? I'm looking at, as we're getting ready for training camp here, I'm starting to get a little excited about training camp battles, and that's one spot that I guess, is he solidified as their nickel corner, or is that a battle?
I don't see it as a battle. I mean, unless I would like to say unless he just looked so awful in camp that they felt like they needed to put somebody else in there. That actually happened a couple of years ago with Patrick Robinson, who looked awful. But then Patrick Robinson got it together over the last 2 weeks and then wound up being one of the best players on the Eagles defense that year. So I don't think there's a lot of concern. I don't know if you saw the Zoom with Nickel Roby Coleman last week or over the weekend, but he even mentioned that the Eagles kind of swooped in late there because they really, really wanted him, and he wanted to be an Eagle. He values what they do at the slot position and what he can do here. So to me, he's got that solidified, and his backup for now would be Crevon LeBlanc, while Avonte Maddox and Sidney Jones are jockeying to start opposite Darius Slay.
I'm glad that you brought Sidney Jones up because that's right here on my list. What are you hearing about Sidney Jones? He went and worked with, one of these great guys in the offseason. He was a second-round pick that had a lot of expectations. He would have been a first-round pick had he not got hurt. A lot of people have signed off or written him off. Are you hearing anything about Sidney Jones? Like, is he the guy that they want or think will win that job?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have not heard anything specifically towards Sidney. I know from Sidney's viewpoint, he feels that the work he's done this offseason has been different than what he's done in the past, and he feels like he's better equipped to really show who he is. I think he used that term, like what we have seen of him is not who he really is, and he's looking forward to proving everyone wrong. And I think the Eagles will for that to happen, but again, I don't know that they're really confident that all of a sudden he's going to wake up and be the Sidney Jones that they drafted in the second round a few years ago, thinking that he was a top 15 pick before his Achilles injury. But this is one of those things where we say, if he's healthy and playing at full potential, this is a good problem to have. Uh-huh. Then you've got to figure out, well, what do you do with Avonte Maddox? Because he's a good player, and you just start to come up with different packages. And you know how it is, Mike. Inevitably, somebody's not going to be playing well that we expect to play well, and they're going to have to take a back seat, and vice versa.
That's right. Doug was asked today about the mouth guards. Like, are the helmets different? Have you seen helmets? Are they any different?
I haven't seen. I know there's that Oakley mouth shield, right? I believe that's what it's called, the mouth shield. That Doug said some teams were going to, some of his players, I should say, we're going to experiment with them. There's those helmets that have that kind of, clear plastic, I want to say mask with the little holes in it, almost like like a plastic mask, but has ventilation to it. So he said some of the players he saw today were looking into experimenting using them. I don't know that if every player, if it's going to be mandated, every player has to use them, but I think we'll find out over the next few days whether players like using them or not.
I guess we'll get your opinion on no college football, specifically in the Big Ten and the Pac-10, and we don't know what's going on with the others, but the NFL closely monitoring all this and the potential of possibly spring college football. I mean, this is unprecedented.
It is unprecedented. I'm looking forward, and I'll let the listeners know that we're supposed to talk with, Adam and I are supposed to talk with Chiefs General Manager Brett Veach today for an Inside the Birds TV, so everybody look out for that, because that should be a good one. And one of the questions we want to ask him, as being a GM and a guy who's come up through the scouting sector, is how he would prepare for next year's draft if there were no college football, or if college football got moved to the spring. Now, if college football got moved to the spring, you'd have to wonder about the health and safety elements of guys playing in April and May and June or whatever, getting drafted then, and then having to go right to training camp in a month or two. It seems like that's a whole lot of football in a condensed amount of time. So we'll ask him about that. I spoke with one agent who represents a player who has opted out this year. And I asked him, I said, well, if they move football to the spring, would players who opt out maybe think about opting in now? And he said he just doesn't know. So everything is very fluid and uncertain right now.
Yeah, I would imagine if you are a lock for a first-round pick, you probably would not opt to play in the spring. And like Joe Burrow, he was a guy that nobody thought was the number one overall pick. If he did not play all last year, who knows when he would have got drafted?
I agree with you. And when we say that, if you're a first-round pick, you're not going to play, well, how many people really know if they're a first-round pick? Because it's easy to say, well, about 30 to 32, right? But if you talk to most GMs and talent evaluators every year, they'll tell you that they don't have 32 first-round grades on guys. They'll have about 10 to 15 to 16, maybe, depending on the strength of the draft. But it's very rare that a team has 32 players that it feels all have first round grades. So if you're being told you're a bottom first rounder or a mid to late first rounder, that means you could be a second rounder. And do you really want to then pass up the opportunity to prove that you are a first rounder?
Wild stuff. We, of course, will keep an eye on that. We had Tyler Donahue on earlier, who covers Penn State, to talk about the fallout. We'll see what happens. The Big 12, the SEC, and the ACC seemingly are going forward with football. We saw the Dallas Cowboys today saying they will play in front of fans for their home games. The Baltimore Ravens said they will limit attendance to 7,500 at home games. So it looks like some teams will have fans, other teams will not. That seems like another thing that could be up for discussion by the NFL. And, of course, we'll keep our eye on that. For Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Make sure you check out the Inside the Birds podcast. Adam Kaplan is in tomorrow for Football at 4, and Geoff Mosher has been our guest today. Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Thanks, pal.
All right. Talk to you soon, Mike.
All right. Geoff Mosher, like August, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. And Football at 4 is brought to you by PlaySugarHouse.com. Sign up now, and they'll match your first deposit up to $250. Go to PlaySugarHouse.com and win real money with their sports book, along with casino games from the comfort of your home. Must be 21 or older to play. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.